Well, this was an odd visit. This had a lot of ups and downs, and I'm talking about the movie, but also about the theater and the staff. This is Matthew Porter, and it's a Draft House Diary for Saturday, December 10th, 2022, and I've come out to the Aspen Grove Alamo Draft House to see Black Panther: Wakanda Forever.
Finally, I got around to seeing Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. I'd put it off because I wanted to watch the original Black Panther again, and I'm glad I did. I wouldn't say that it's strictly necessary. If you've seen the original at least once, you probably remember the plot points that you really need, and they remind you of some of the rest. But I'm glad I did revisit the first one before I saw this. Now, of course, they planned a Black Panther sequel for a long time, and it had to be completely reworked and re-engineered, rewritten, because of the untimely death of Chadwick Boseman in 2020. And that is, it permeates this movie so completely because wisely they use that in the movie. They use that in the performances. This is a movie that is about a people who are bereft, a family who has lost a loved one, a leader who is gone, a symbol who is gone. And as powerful as Wakanda remains, there is this emptiness left with the passing of King T'Challa, and there being no Black Panther because, as shown in the first movie, the heart-shaped flower that gave the Black Panther his powers had been destroyed. And I can only imagine how the actors in this movie used the fact that they had lost their friend and colleague, Chadwick Boseman, how they used that in their performances. And there are some really powerful performances in this movie informed by all of that. As far as the story, this presents us with a Wakanda that is still strong and yet is subject to a number of crises. One is outside attacks. There are forces in the world, countries in the world, organizations in the world that are not content to get the benefit of the technological and cultural outreach centers that have been set up around the world as decided by King T'Challa at the end of the first movie. So some of these outreach centers are under attack by people who want to seize and claim the power of Wakanda's technology and of the MacGuffin element of vibranium. And there's also the fact that vibranium is suddenly being discovered in other places outside of Wakanda, namely in the ocean. In addition to these outside attacks and the possibility of Wakanda losing some of its power by not have some of its leverage, at least, by not being the sole source of vibranium. There's also some internal dissension that we see developing in Wakanda in terms of how to respond to this new world. And of course, as I mentioned, they're dealing with the fact that they have no Black Panther. Into that, we have what is really the plot-driving crisis of this movie, which is the appearance of Namor and the Atlanteans. So here we finally have Namor of Atlantis being added to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And it's an interesting way that they add Namor. Well, the reason they add Namor is that the attempts to find vibranium under the ocean is threatening exposure and the resources of his people in his undersea kingdom. Namor is an interesting character as they presented him here. This is not the Namor that I knew from the comics when I was a kid. Namor had been half human, half Atlantean, sort of presented in the comics as Asian, but maybe ambiguously Asian in style and appearance. Although, of course, the name is just a Roman spelled backwards, and there was a certain Roman imperial feel to the character and the way he carried himself. Here in the MCU, the way they've introduced Namor in Black Panther, he has a Mesoamerican origin. And he and others escaped to the sea with the help of a special flower or herb, and to escape the ravages of colonialism, both disease and violence and otherwise. And they even retcon his name. It's not Roman spelled backwards. It's a little snippet of Spanish that he adopts after it's used as an accusation against him. I like those changes. They're interesting. They fit very well into the style and mythos of Wakanda and Black Panther. So these are changes that I can definitely get behind. And Namor presents an ultimatum to the people of Wakanda. You've got to join me in fighting all the rest of these surface dwellers. They want what only we have, vibranium. They're going to stop at nothing to get it and destroy us in doing so. So we have to be together in fighting against them. And in Namor's view, that is, we must destroy the surface dwellers, with the apparent exception of Wakanda. And by the way, Wakanda, if you are not with us, you're part of the enemy. That's interesting because it sets up a dynamic of two different peoples, two different potentially threatened or historically oppressed peoples in terms of the way it's presented in a story, responding to their circumstances in very different ways. Too often, there is just a clear us and them, and anybody who is roughly on the same side is presented as part of a monolith, with no internal conflict or discussion. Here we have Wakanda and Namor's kingdom both recognizing the threat that is presented by the rest of the world's greed for vibranium, but they have different beliefs and approaches and values in terms of how to respond to that. And that, of course, makes for interesting storytelling. Similarly, I like the different views of faith presented within Wakanda and even within the Wakandan royal family. Too often in storytelling, if you've got a civilization with an ancient tradition, it is depicted as following this pure and ancient spiritual path that, of course, everyone there believes. Here, instead, the very first line of the movie has Shuri, the technological genius and T'Challa's sister, Shuri, stating her unbelief in their goddess, Bast, even as she prays to Bast to heal her brother, and promises to have renewed faith if she can do so. And this, by the way, the very first scene in the movie involves the death of King T'Challa. And most of the movie takes place a year later. And the movie overall, it's mainly Shuri's journey, involving faith and strength and hard decisions, being a follower of her mother, the Queen, being a leader herself, making these decisions. I think Shuri was, for me, the breakout character in the first film. Circumstances led to her further prominence in this film, and I think it is done extremely well. And Letitia Wright does an amazing job in portraying this character and portraying all these difficult decisions and this journey that she goes on. The movie did have some problems for me. I thought that Namor, as a superheroic character, an anti-hero really, I think Namor was individually overpowered. They sort of had to do that to make him a credible threat to the nation of Wakanda. He has an army, of course, and a whole kingdom, but it really came down to how incredibly powerful Namor as an individual was, and their need to deal with that power that he had as an individual. It seemed out of balance, even for a movie that is predicated on the idea of this amazing kingdom of Wakanda, normally has this one superpowered hero and defender, Black Panther. The degree of power that they gave Namor in some of the fight scenes was a little bit over the top. Another issue, I think Martin Freeman's character as the CIA operative, or who is also an ally of Wakanda, it almost seemed like an afterthought. There wasn't anything in the story that absolutely needed that character in there. I would have preferred they either use him better or leave him out, not have as much going on with that character. I thought that what I probably unfairly thought of after this movie as that Wakandan attitude was a little bit overdone. And what I mean is there's some great dialogue in the first movie and some really good lines in this movie where Wakandans are just talking about how primitive the rest of the world is. And that can be a lot of fun. And it's understandable given how they portray Wakanda. But when you've got characters spending so much time, it seems to me, talking to the people that they're meeting from outside of Wakanda, talking to their fellow Wakandans about this, there's a point at which it starts to make Wakanda seem weak if they have to talk about this so much, as opposed to simply being incredibly advanced. There's a certain dignity and a certain confidence that was portrayed by Chadwick Boseman as King T'Challa. You never had any doubt that King T'Challa was the leader and hero of a mighty, brilliant, technologically advanced civilization, and he never had to talk about it because he had this confidence in this position. I could have done with a little more of that in this movie. I think they were mostly going for the humor of it. And yeah, sometimes it was funny, but it took me out of the movie when I realized, is this all these people talk about? Also, another character who was introduced in this movie, Riri Williams as Ironheart. Riri Williams is from the comics. She's in many ways the successor to Iron Man. She's a brilliant, multidisciplinary MIT student in science and engineering and mathematics and computer science, and essentially builds her own Iron Man suit. It's a great character, a lot of great potential, and I think she's absolutely wasted in this movie. She's a MacGuffin. She happened to invent a vibranium detector, which the Wakandans want to prevent others from using, and therefore they have to kidnap Riri, and then Riri meets Shuri, and they're kind of simpatico because they're both brilliant technological young women. But the character is not developed enough. There are so many characters already here from the first movie, plus Namor and some of his associates. Riri kind of gets lost in the shuffle, and that's disappointing because I'd like to see more of that character. I'd like to see more interesting things done with that character as opposed to her being a MacGuffin. As far as filmmaking, it was well done, well shot, beautiful looking in so many ways. There were times in which I think it had a kind of a sequelitis, where you've got so many things they've had to add in order to have a sequel story, and so many characters that you need to follow, both new and old characters, that the plots and locations were often split and were moving around a great deal between things that are happening in different places. And some of the action itself, like a tremendous battle scene towards the end of the movie, it got kind of muddled and frenetic. There were some cool tactical tricks and set pieces that we get to see, but too often it was easy to lose the thread of who is where, doing what, and why, because there was so much to keep track of. And that's in comparison to the absolutely excellent action blocking and editing that the first movie had, because it was contained, it was very straightforward, you always knew what you were supposed to care about and what you were supposed to pay attention to, and that's part of filmmaking. Still, this list of problems I had with the movie notwithstanding, it was still an excellent movie. I think it's one of the best of the most recent Marvel entries, so I highly recommend it. Now, as always, I need to review the rest of the theater experience, and not quite as good as the movie, to say the least. Well, I'll back up. Before I get into talking about the theater as well, I had a problem with the app. I've had some problems with the Alamo app on and off, and the app is the only way to get tickets using a season pass. So when I was buying the tickets, it was about an hour or so before showtime, and as far as I could tell, I selected a Saturday night ticket. I thought, a Saturday night ticket. After my payment, it gave me information about my Sunday afternoon ticket. That's not what I wanted. But I knew that Alamo was going to take care of this, and they did. I went to the theater, I talked to the associate at the box office desk, and they sorted the whole thing out. They comped me tickets, 2 tickets for the Saturday evening show that I wanted to see. I was able to return the Sunday tickets. Everything was fine. Then, well, first of all, a warning for discussion of illness and bodily functions that's coming up. If you don't like that kind of thing, if it disturbs you, just wanted you to be aware. I'm fine. Everybody I was with was fine. Somebody else, though, wasn't. Before showtime, we were there a little early. I went into the men's restroom and I discovered that one of the sinks was unusable because it was clogged because someone had been violently ill into the sink. I'm sure that's the kind of thing that happens. You're in a movie theater, you're any kind of a entertainment venue, that kind of thing's going to happen. So after I washed my hands in the other sink and I went back to the desk to tell the guy, I'm sorry to bring you bad news, but here's what I discovered in the men's bathroom. I figured you'd want to know sooner rather than later. And I just got a blank stare. Like, no acknowledgement that I was there and speaking. Now, I'm sure it was the end of a long day, and this is the last thing this guy wanted to hear. I know that. I can sympathize. But at least acknowledge that someone's talking to you and that someone's trying to do you a solid by letting you know something that it's better for you to know than for you to discover later in some other way. Eventually, as I was finally leaving, having figured, well, I told this guy as much as I could, I don't know if he heard me, he gets on a radio and starts to talk to somebody, a manager, I presume, to arrange a cleanup. And it turns out the problem wasn't just in the men's bathroom. It was outside in the hallway near the men's bathroom. I hadn't missed that before. And also, we couldn't get into our theater because it turns out that this whole unfortunate incident with whoever it was who was not feeling well at the end of the last screening of Black Panther, the whole thing had started on the exit ramp out of the theater that we were going into, which is, of course, also the entrance ramp. Again, guests should not have to tell you about something like this, and if they do, you should at least acknowledge that someone is speaking to you. And also, when you're arranging to clean this up, you shouldn't be standing in the hallway surrounded by patrons of your movie theater, talking loudly into a radio about the puke trail and where it starts and where it goes. There are better ways to deal with that in a service-oriented business. Luckily, they were able to deal with the problem. They were able to begin to clean up and cover up the problem at the entrance ramp. And fortunately, this is a theater where, an auditorium in this theater where the ramp that you have to go in is big. It's also well separated from the theater itself. So ultimately, it didn't really cause a problem with our ability to sit and watch and enjoy the movie. We did miss half the pre-show, which had some really good stuff about Namor and his history in Marvel Comics, and about Black Panther in the comics and in the previous movie. Some great segments with Evan Narcisse, who is a Marvel writer, who was talking about the history of the Black Panther character. Very interesting stuff. If there was more with him, I'm really sorry that I missed it. Maybe I'll see if I can find that pre-show somewhere else. And the food, if we want to talk about food after talking about all that. We had dinner elsewhere before we went to the movie theater. I'm kind of glad that that was the case. But after we settled in and we were getting situated in the theater itself, we ordered some snacks. I had a chocolate shake. I don't think I'd had their chocolate shake before, and it was simple, it was straightforward, it was good. I enjoyed that. My darling wife had hot cocoa, and she had the spiked hot cocoa, which is another one of the holiday offerings they have been advertising. And by default, the spiked hot cocoa has Baileys added, but you can get other things added if you don't like Baileys. And our server was terrific. He talked with us about the different menu offerings, some of the additional menu offerings they've added, and had this long conversation about what you could possibly put into the hot cocoa and what would be good. Eventually, turned out that Kahlua, unsurprisingly, is really good in hot cocoa. One problem with the hot cocoa when you get it spiked is they don't serve it in the reasonably sized paper cup that the holiday hot cocoa is served in normally. They serve it in a glass mug, which is actually pretty small. It's much smaller than the serving you get in when you're not getting it spiked. I don't know why that is. It's the same small glass mug that they use when they're serving Irish coffee. And between the fact that it's that much smaller and you're also displacing some of the cocoa with some of the alcohol. It's a little bit small a serving for how much they charge and for what you might expect. You shouldn't get that much less overall just because you're choosing to get the hot cocoa spiked as opposed to plain. Either way, though, it was still very good. Everything we had was good, and we enjoyed the movie. So, a good movie, some good aspects to the theater experience, but overall, this has got to be way down there as one of the worst theater experiences I've had at an Alamo. And unfortunately, it was at what is usually my favorite Alamo, my local at Aspen Grove. But I'm not giving up on them. I will be back there sometime soon, I'm sure, and I'll be bringing more Draft House Diary reviews when I do. But thank you very much for watching. Please join me again. If you enjoyed this, you watched this far, please consider clicking like down below. If you want to see more of these reviews, click subscribe. Either way, thanks again, and I'll see you soon. In the meantime, enjoy your movies, and when you do, stay till the end of the credits.